there was something that happened in California, right? Are they calling this an Ebony Alert?
Yeah, so there was a new California law that created the Ebony Alert to find missing Black youth and women. They were looking to find, to address missing persons between the ages of 12 and 25. Now, most people know that, we have the Amber Alert, which is a nationwide alert for missing children. However, in practice, I mean, it's supposed to address missing children, everybody, but in practice, they've found that it's usually not applied across the board in an even manner. More often than not, white children are prioritized over Black children or, children of other ethnic groups. Yeah. And so there was a politician, a state senator in California who proposed this Ebony Alert that will give resources and attention to missing Black children and women in the same way that they're applied to missing children under the Amber Alert. And so it was signed into law by Governor Newsom and supposed to go into effect January 1st. So when it hit social media, there were, of course, mixed reactions. The reaction that I had and many other people, especially that I've seen from the Black community, was, why is this necessary? We shouldn't have to have an Ebony Alert for Black children and women. You should just force the police to follow the law that's already in place. Right. This also can open up the chance that, since it's specifically designated for Black youth and women, that it's another way that they can discriminate on the calls that they're going to actually follow and listen to. So it's like, why would you create a whole new law?
Explain that one. You're saying that could lead to more discrimination?
I think it could be because, first of all, if they're already not following up when it's Black children, they're making different reasons or excuses why they don't go into the system for the Amber Alert already. Then if this comes in and it's a report for a missing child, then they just pass it off to the Ebony thing. They don't even put any attention or anything into it initially because, okay, we're going to move it to a different group.
Right. And right. It reminds me of the whole separate but equal thing, right?
Right.
And right. We learned that that's not really equal, right? You can't have separate but equal.
Right.
That's why this raises constitutional questions for me. I always think about that when you're talking about categorizations based on race, you're subject to strict scrutiny, right? Meaning it's presumptively unconstitutional unless the state can prove that it's narrowly tailored to fit a compelling governmental interest. Now, you might have a compelling governmental interest here. And I'll say that in New York, we worked on something similar, although we didn't have a specific law just for Black youth or for any type of ethnicity. But what we did find was that police reports were more often taken when the missing person or when the victim was a white person as compared to a person of color. And that is why I think there is a compelling governmental interest to address this discrepancy. But then you have the question of, is this narrowly tailored? Or in other words, is this the least restrictive means of doing it? Because you don't want to have state-sponsored discrimination or state-sponsored different categories based on race or ethnicity. And so I do think that there are real questions there. Is this the least restrictive way, the least discriminatory way of addressing the discrepancy that does exist? There is that discrepancy. Now, in New York, what we did was we passed the missing adults law, and I actually myself was able to draft the language for it to overcome a veto that it had suffered the year prior to my arrival in Albany. That was done to address, and you can read the sponsor's memo that I drafted, it was done to address in part this discrepancy that when it was optional in New York for police agencies to file a report on a missing adult, they tended to follow up more when it was a white person than when it was not. And so what we said was, now the law is going to say you always have to do it when these factors are met. And essentially it was a reasonable concern for the person's safety, right? When that is there, then the police don't have a choice. It isn't you pick which ones you pursue, you just have to do it. And that was our attempt to meet that compelling interest, right? So if we could do that in New York, then it suggests to me that what they're doing in California isn't necessarily the least restrictive means. I think there are other ways of doing this, of achieving that same goal.
Yeah, I agree. I think, listen, a missing child is a missing child. It shouldn't matter
Regardless,
what
exactly.
they come from,
Yeah.
And, I think the easier way, instead of creating a new law, is to hold law enforcement accountable for how they're failing to address missing children and how they're disproportionately addressing missing children cases. I think that's much better than creating a whole new law. Now, they did go in to talk about how they've had to do this, or I don't know if you can say had to, but they've done this in different cases, right? So they have the feather alert in California for indigenous people in California that was signed into law in 2022. They have a silver alert for seniors.
Mm-hmm.
They have a blue alert for missing police officers. And so he was saying, then why is this an issue that we have an ebony alert for African Americans? And yes, I agree. Like we know all these things are disproportionately affect these communities in different ways, but we're talking missing children here. We have a missing children alert. This isn't for missing white children. This is missing children.
Right.
Doesn't matter if they're white, black,
and that's right. And that's my question. Why do you need a different color alert for a different type of child? Why not just everyone has to go into the alert system? Why does it have to be, this is going to be a black alert, this is a white alert? I don't understand that part of it.
Right. And what's happening is
that's going to create more division, guys. I believe, it's going to create more animosity. Sorry to jump in,
No, please.
It's similar to an Amber Alert. That means, similar to an Amber Alert means Ebony Alert would be displayed on across all the television and media. But now because you have a specific name, Ebony, is gonna, I think, is gonna create more animosity. Is gonna create a lot of division in whoever we're receiving the calls.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be any specific, color or race, like you guys are saying, a child is a missing child. You know what I mean? We shouldn't specifically say, oh, there's a black child or Indian child or a white child. So these things, I think, before, yes, they passed the bill already, but they should have looked into it more, more aggressively, how the outcome is going to be in the long term.
Yeah.
Yes, 39% of 12 to 25-year-old kids are, black kids, but again, we shouldn't have a different specific name for it, and that's my discipline. It should be one name protecting us all. It doesn't matter what color you are.
Yeah, and I think, Cairo, you hit on exactly why the Constitution frowns upon different categorizations, different categories or distinctions based on race. The state isn't supposed to do that unless they have a compelling reason and unless it's narrowly tailored, the least restrictive means. But it just, to me, it doesn't seem like that this meets those criteria. So I think that it would be ripe for a constitutional challenge. Now, I don't know, Jay, if we have any information as to whether those other alerts, you said there's one already for indigenous missing people.
Right.
I don't know if that one was challenged constitutionally already. See, the one for police officers isn't a racial category, so that's a little different. But we start talking about race. Now, it's possible you might get something like, well, if you put out an alert for missing indigenous people, that notifies the tribes, or there's something in there that works with the people of those communities because maybe they are living in their own areas. I'm not sure, if that's part of it, but that could be more of a compelling reason or more of a justification for why they would do that. But when you start talking about Black people versus white people or Hispanic people or South Asian, any type of ethnicity, I think it's harder to justify unless you have a real practical reason why that's needed.
Well, and listen, don't get me wrong. I understand why, someone might feel that this is necessary, right? Because like you said, we know that in practice, white children going missing is taken more seriously than minority children. We know that's the case in practice. Missing minority children are often labeled as runaways first, which does not trigger the Amber Alert system, right? Missing adults are often minority adults are often labeled as involvement in criminal activity or gangs, which again would not trigger any of these systems. Whereas a missing white child is going to be more of a ruckus in this case here. I think it also brings up the possibility that if it's going across the screen as it does now, the Amber Alert, right? People perk up, okay, there's a missing child. Right. But if it goes across as the Ebony Alert, you're going to have people who do have their biases or whatever and be like, oh, Ebony Alert, that doesn't apply to me. I'm not
right. Well, whatever. They're going to
yes, right. Yes, you're right.
They'll be even tuned more to it, whatever the case. Either they're going to tune it out, tune it in, but they're going to take note of the fact that it's a black child, and that's going to be the focus of it.
Exactly.
So try to find this person, and that is a distinction between what we worked on in New York and this, because what we did wasn't just the alert system, and so it was about police departments doing their job, following the reports and pursuing it, right? Uploading the information to the database and taking this seriously. But what they're doing in California is specifically about the alert systems. Now you're talking about not just the police doing their job, but the public being notified of it.
Notified, yes.
Right. And so now it's not just a matter of police reports, it's a matter of telling the public, hey, there's a missing black child to look out for. There's a missing indigenous child, right? And so I think that adds another layer
to the front, absolutely. You're right.
Involving the public, and the government is now making racial classifications to the public, and it's not just the public,
exactly.
There's a missing child.
And the public is going to choose if they want to help or not. The public is going to choose if they want to help or not. So that creates an even greater problem than what we have now.
Yeah, the government holding itself out in an outwardly discriminatory manner, which I think is troublesome.
Yeah.
And the thing is, what needs to happen is law enforcement need to be held accountable for not following up how they're supposed to. Right? There was a 2020 report that came out by the Congressional Black Caucus that showed that 40% of sex trafficking victims were identified as Black women. All right, and that their Black girls are more likely to be trafficked at a younger age than their racial counterparts, and so that 57 was it Black children make up more than 57% of all juvenile prostitution arrests. So it's a way of people are looking at it, way people are, these communities are more vulnerable. We talked about that earlier when we were talking about potentially people in immigrant communities afraid to reach out to police or whatever it is. In this case, or knowing that people could commit crimes against them because they know that they're more vulnerable or ignored. And that's the same thing that's happening with Black children, and specifically Black girls, is sex traffickers are knowing that people aren't looking for these girls as much as they're looking for white girls. So they're going to go to them more often than not. And so we need to make sure the system that's out there, the Amber Alert that's out there, is applied to everyone as the way it should be applied, so that these numbers will go down, not only for people targeting African Americans, but for people targeting minority groups, but for people in general, because children are being looked for.
Right. All right. So we do have to wrap up. I want to put the poll question out for the people, and we can come back next week and give our results. So the poll question of the week is, do you believe there should be a separate missing persons alert specifically for Black youth, as was done in California?
All right. And
people say on that.
Yeah, well, I have my suspicions. The type of people that are going to come out of the woodwork because of the trigger word of Black.
Well, we'll see. Hopefully we get some responses from people across the political and ideological and racial divide, and we can come back with a nuanced discussion next week.
Right. And that's what we try to do here. That's what we hope to do here, is have a nuanced discussion. And we've said it a million times, a lot of these issues, people have similar views. It's the way it's talked about, or that they don't look into it in different ways. And so this type of discussion is really necessary, especially these days in the landscape that's happening out there.